Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Okay. Just wanted to make sure I'm in the right place. Welcome to the panel, Clean Heat Standard. What is it intended to do? What does it mean for Vermonters? My name is Curtis Reed. I'm Executive Director of Vermont Partnership for Fairness and Diversity. Vermont Partnership serves as the public engagement facilitator for the Clean Heat Standard team. For full disclosure, I also serve on the VCRB Board of Directors. However, my role here today is as public engagement facilitator. I am honored to moderate this esteemed panel, which includes Jared, John, Mia, and Ed. And I'll have them introduce themselves after I run through the housekeeping. I encourage everyone to read their individual and brief bios that's in the program. Circulating among you is a card with 2 QR codes. One side will take you to the Public Utilities Commission Clean Heat Standard webpage, where you can follow directions to leave comments on Act 18. The other side will take you to a brief plain English rendering of Act 18. The session will be recorded and a link posted to our website within 2 weeks, technology permitting. Broadly speaking, we've heard from three groups around the state. Businesses that deliver or install clean heat measures to consumers, clean energy advocates, and consumers of heating and cooling energy. Act 18 creates a clean heat standard program with financial incentives that promote the adoption of clean heating and cooling technologies. The bill brings the state closer to a more sustainable energy future. However, the success of this program hinges not only on its environmental effectiveness, but also on its prioritization of affordability and accessibility. I have just a couple of questions for the panel to start, and then I'll open it up to the general floor for discussion. So let's start with introductions.
Hi, my name is Ed McNamara. I'm chair of the Public Utility Commission in Vermont. We're a regulatory body. We fully oversee the electric and natural gas utilities, and also have some regulation over telecommunications, cable, water, and then clean heat is bringing us into sort of the thermal sector and some regulation of heating fuel providers. And just a little bit more on me, 20 years of regulatory nerd in Vermont.
Thanks. I'm Mia Watson. I'm from Vermont Housing Finance Agency. We are a quasi-governmental agency that functions sort of like a bank for affordable housing. We offer mortgages for primarily first-time home buyers, and we also offer tax credits and loans to affordable rental housing. And we're also doing a lot more other types of housing as well, including manufactured home replacement and moderate income rental and workforce housing and home buying opportunities as well. So a lot going on in affordable housing these days. I manage a lot of VHFA's energy policy and our effort to attract more resources to electrify our buildings. And I also sit as chair of the Equity Advisory Group, which is advising the Public Utility Commission on the implementation of the Clean Heat Standard. Thanks.
Good morning, I'm John McCormick from Bristol. I'm the director of the Louise Diamond Committee to Protect Next Generations. My bio in the program represents my environmental professional career. I was a lobbyist in Washington for about 3 decades, working with an environmental organization. One of the bills we worked on was the coal strip mine reclamation law. It took us 7 years to get President Carter to sign it. I actually wrote the Indian land section of the entire section of that bill. I also worked on the acid rain program. I live in a 9-acre forest, and I walk around those trees and I say, well, we did something right. I live in a 2-story log home, no drywall. I cannot put in a heat pump. And that's why I'm here to talk about why S5 is not good for me or my family, and I want to share that with you.
Hi everybody, my name is Jared Duval. I serve as an appointed member of the Vermont Climate Council. It's a 23-member body that's responsible for authoring Vermont's Climate Action Plan, which was completed in 2021. And a clean heat standard was the #1 pollution reducing recommendation in that Climate Action Plan. So I was appointed to the council by the legislature to provide expertise in energy and data analysis. And on the Vermont Climate Council, I co-chair the Science and Data Subcommittee, and I also serve on the Cross-Sector Mitigation Subcommittee, which was the primary committee that was responsible for assessing and then recommending pollution reduction measures in Vermont's climate action plan.
Great, thank you. No, I'm gonna start with you, Ed. Okay, so the first question for everyone is, what is Act 18 or S5 to you? And to what extent do you believe the implementation of Act 18 will reduce greenhouse gases? We're gonna do the easy stuff first.
Thanks, appreciate that. So Act 18 Clean Heat Standard it's a requirement on heating fuel providers, actually anybody who brings or imports or brings into Vermont heating fuel. It's a regulatory structure, that's the way I think about it, and it is putting heating fuel providers primarily under a regulatory scheme that's somewhat cross between the energy efficiency utility and how we have traditionally decarbonized the electric sector. So it's trying a couple different strategies that we've never tried. And now that I've babbled on for that, I forgot your second question.
No, that was those.
Okay,
That was
so
it.
there's 2 parts.
Yeah, no, this first part is really about, what is the act to you?
Yep.
And to what extent do you believe it will reduce greenhouse gases? Because ultimately, that's what it will.
Thank you. So on that last part, yes, the act is designed and it would be implemented in a way that reduces greenhouse gases. Do you want more detail?
As much as you're willing to give. That's why we're here.
So I actually wrote out, I could go through the overall act and the basic mechanism in probably 3 to 5 minutes.
Okay,
My sort of technocrat view and the way that I see it.
sure.
I think that is just to provide context. So, already talked a little bit about Public Utility Commission. We're going to be the ones regulating this.
Hold the mic a little closer, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Global Warming Solutions Act is an important background piece that everyone needs to know. It was an act passed, I believe it was 2020, requires greenhouse gas reductions over a certain time frame in every single sector of Vermont's energy usage. Act 18 passed last year, directed the PUC along with Department of Public Service to work, and also folks like Mia and other volunteers, to help develop the Clean Heat Standard. The act itself is fairly extensive and provides the superstructure. We're essentially filling in the details of what the program would look like. We're going to propose rules to the legislature January 15th, 2025, and then it's up to the legislature whether or not they want to approve it and go forward with the Clean Heat Standard. Very, very high level. The entire purpose is for the Clean Heat Standard to actually achieve Global Warming Solutions Act reduction requirements. Side note, thermal sector, I'm going to mostly talk about, and we'll mostly talk about heating fuel. That's the vast majority of it. There's some details that we need to work out, propane canisters, things like that. technically part of the thermal sector, at least when it comes to Global Warming Solutions Act. So anyone who sells heating fuels into or within Vermont required to register with the Public Utility Commission. And then certain members of that group are required to take some action to reduce GHG emissions. The Act also talks about social equity, requiring that we look at the appropriate measures or the appropriate spending levels for customers with low and moderate income. In other words, the Act actually requires 16% of measures go for low income customers with low income, another 16% for customers with moderate income. And one of our responsibilities is to look and say, should we actually front load more of that? There are going to be costs with Clean Heat Standard that are going to be borne by everybody. So should we consider, or should we be front loading some of the requirements so more of the benefits in the early years go to customers with low and moderate income?
Yeah, I think Ed did a great job of sort of an overview of the framework. I think an example of how I would view it as a housing funder, which I think might sort of illuminate it, is installing a heat pump or insulating a building through weatherization or high performance new construction generates clean heat credits, and the obligated parties who import fossil fuels into the state need those credits to meet their obligations. So there's going to be a monetary incentive to obtain those credits from people producing the credits. And so affordable housing is bringing new units online every day, and there's a tremendous cost to building to a high performance standard. We require at VHFA and our sister agency VHCB that all new affordable housing with limited exceptions meets Efficiency Vermont's high performance building standard. And we're currently estimating that costs $60,000 above what it would cost to meet code, and that's a per unit cost. And we're only getting about $3,700 per unit from Efficiency Vermont in incentives for meeting that. The rest is all housing dollars, and every dollar we put in efficiency up front means less that we can build today for more affordable housing or more services for residents. So we're under a significant cost crunch to try to electrify our buildings. And I'm hopeful that as we bring new buildings online, new units online for affordable housing, we can trade some of those credits that we're producing for more money to invest in buildings and reach a really high standard of efficiency, and hopefully electrify our buildings so they don't rely on fossil fuels. So that's one example of sort of how I see existing forms of helping low-income Vermonters and moderate-income Vermonters install equipment into their homes and buildings and businesses, generate benefits from this system. So there's a much larger framework of sort of the regulatory system of making this happen, but I'm hoping we can pair sort of more direct incentives for reducing emissions than we have previously. So that's my hope for how the Clean Heat Standard will work if it's functioning optimally.
I'm really pleased the number of persons who've come here to understand it's a very complex issue. How about we give a big wish to Ella St. Pierre, who may right now be in her starting blocks and ready to bring home a gold medal. And another question, how many of you took a bus to get here? See, that's where Vermont's really in a bind. Don't misconstrue what I'm saying about the Clean Heat Act. I see a child, an infant, and I grieve for them because I understand what their future is going to be. We are approaching turning points on this planet, turning points that are going to forever change the globe's planet. There is nothing on our planet that can cool us down. The trend line is warmer. And if anything, we have to think about our children and prepare them for this in any way we possibly can, mentally and physically. Now, I want to put out some numbers because without these numbers, it's hard to see where Vermont stands in the sort of in the world of problems. Thank you, sir. I'll start with this number. is 47 billion tons of global carbon dioxide equivalent. You have to factor that into Vermont's small role in that. Vermont in 2023, about roughly 8.3 million tons carbon dioxide equivalent. The heating, the thermal heat portion of that is about 31%. So we are talking about an extremely small number. 2.6 million tons is Vermont's home heating fuel contribution to that number, okay? And that's, we have to factor these things in because we are going to spend a huge amount of money that my family is considering we won't be able to afford. If they raise our fuel bills 70 cents, $1.20, whatever, I'll be burning more wood, using less oil. And at my age, that's not a bright future. Now, there were some other things that I wanted to say, but I think trying to stay within 5 minutes. There is an alternative. We have the Weatherization Assistance Program that is run by the Office of Economic Opportunity. It's comprised of 5 partnerships around the state who last year and this year will have weatherized a total of about 2,700 homes. Weatherizing, putting in heat pumps where they can. Okay? If we would expand Weatherization Assistance Program from its 2-cent fee, which we're now paying, to 4 cents, to 6 cents, to 8 cents, to 10 cents, we could increase the salary of these workers from their $20 an hour, crawling under crawl spaces and up in attics, fighting the bats, $20 an hour. Raise their salaries to $30 an hour. Because the biggest problem this Act 18 is going to face is we don't have enough workers. We're not paying them enough. So we pay them $30 an hour, we're going to see more people come in and line up for these jobs. Now, between 2018 and 2020, an average of roughly 2,000 homes per year were comprehensively weatherized, from 27,000 to 36,000 by 2022. There's another part of this that I'll just voice it. The fuel use is going down slightly, in part because of warmer weather. And I don't have the quote exactly here, but Jared said, it's ironic that we're seeing the benefits of global warming by reducing the demand for heating oil. Well, we also have polar vortex. So yes, things are getting warmer, but things can be cold for days and weeks. And the low-income heat energy assistance program clients, among almost 30,000 in the state, they can't afford to pay their full heating bill. So they require federal contribution to Vermont and then taxpayer contribution to help pay about $900 a year on average. If you increase the fuel costs, that will be borne by LIHEAP. If the Congress isn't increasing its contribution because we've raised the fees, LIHEAP is going to have less dollars to contribute. It will probably liquidate itself sooner in the winter season. And these families who are energy burdened are going to find themselves having to pay a higher price, though their house may not be accountable, just as mine is, to heat pumps and the other technologies. About 30%, I'll just finish with this, about 30% of houses, it is considered, may not be able to be retrofitted. So we're looking at this alternative, and is Representative Massillon here? Well, he's ready to introduce the bill next year to expand WAP, and I thank you for your time.
Thanks, John. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. So 3 things. What is the Affordable Heat Act and the Clean Heat Standard that it advances? I would highlight 3 top things. One is it is a performance standard, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means. Second, it's designed for equity and flexibility. And then the third thing is it is the single biggest pollution reduction recommendation, climate pollution reduction in the Vermont's climate action plan. So just want to walk through each of those. It's a performance standard. It sets a requirement on importers of fossil heating fuels, fossil fuels used in residential, commercial, and industrial buildings, that they reduce pollution over time in line with the legal obligations that Vermont has created through the Global Warming Solutions Act. And the Global Warming Solutions Act was Vermont saying, we have a responsibility to do our part, to take responsibility for the climate pollution we create, and to reduce it at a scale and pace that aligns with science-based targets that the United States and the global community have set. So it's not saying we need to try to reduce the 47 billion number that John put up there. It is saying that we need to do our part to be responsible for the climate pollution we create here and do the same that others are committed to elsewhere. Performance standards are really common in the energy arena. What's kind of new about this is applying it in the thermal sector. So the renewable energy standard, renewable electricity standards, those are performance standards that apply to electric utilities to reduce pollution over time. This is taking that same idea and finally putting that responsibility not just on electric utilities, but also on importers of fossil fuels, which is the vast majority of where Vermont's climate pollution comes from, the fossil fuels imported both for heating and for transportation. It's designed for equity and flexibility. One of the things that is very central to the Affordable Heat Act is the requirement that at least 16% of the clean heat services be provided to Vermonters with low income, and another 16% be provided to Vermonters with either low or moderate income. Now that may sound small, but remember this is out of a total of all of the clean heat services that are required across the thermal sector. What makes up the thermal sector? Residential, commercial, and industrial fuel use. Residential fuel use is a little over half, commercial fuel use is a little over a third, and industrial fuel use is about 15% of the total. Commercial and industrial customers are not eligible for it. They cannot qualify as Vermonters with low or moderate income. So that combined 32% can only come from the 52% of Vermont fuel customers who are residential. Now we don't know, for instance, exactly what the share of clean heat services are going to be provided to residences versus businesses versus industry. But if they are provided along the lines of the current fuel use, that would mean that about 60% of all residential clean heat services would be going to Vermonters with low or moderate incomes. It was intentionally designed to be a progressive, disproportionate share of the clean heat activity and services going to lower and moderate income Vermonters. And there's a lot more that I want to say, but I think that that's probably good for an initial intro and pass it back to you, Curtis.
Okay, there are a couple of things which sort of struck me. One was the question about equity and who qualifies for clean energy credits, and then how do those credits get monetized in a way that regular Vermonters like ourselves can benefit from, or if that was the intent of the bill.
So the equity piece is really a requirement for the providers in terms of a certain portion of the measures is how I think about it, really need to be targeted to low and moderate income Vermonters. In terms of how a credit is, I think of it as minted, how is a credit created? Commission is still working on that. We came up with a preliminary recommendation that at least for residential customers, if it is the weatherization assistance providers who weatherize the house, install heat pumps, they're putting in 100% of the costs, they get that money, or they get the credits. They then take the credits, hand it on to either a heating fuel provider or this default delivery agent. Either way, it eventually gets used for compliance. And when I say hand it over, basically sell it. They're gonna get some money for that. If it's me who's not qualifying for low, moderate income, and I put in a heat pump, I would get the credit, and then I would work with either the installer or somebody else who's providing the incentive. And essentially, that installer or provider, somebody else would get that credit. They could then sell it to the heating fuel provider or default delivery agent.
Okay, I'm just trying to imagine as a renter or, small, as a renter, because most of Vermont rents. How does that impact my position in the marketplace if I'm not the one who is gleaning the credits?
Sure, so I think in the very short term of the clean heat standard, before we've sort of seen any transformative effects on the market, we're gonna have sort of more of what is already happening. People will sort of turn to existing programs to increase more of what they're doing. So the primary way that renters are assisted, that's about 30% of Vermont households are renters, are through the Weatherization Assistance Program. That helps renters and homeowners under 80% of area median income and affordable housing. So I think for the lower income households targeted under the Clean Heat Standard, it's just going to be sort of more resources flowing into those programs. For the moderate income programs, I think we'll see more happening, through programs like Efficiency Vermont, Vermont Gas, and Burlington Electric that are already sort of providing incentives for customers to fuel switch and weatherize. So I think we're just going to see sort of more of those existing channels, seeing more funds flowing in and potentially deeper incentives. From an equity perspective, I think what the Equity Advisory Group is really concerned about is sort of who is not being well served under that existing framework, and what do we need to do if we can guess that sort of more of the same is going to happen in the short term. And when you mentioned renters, Curtis, we are really concerned about the split incentive, and I don't want to take up too much time, but the split incentive is basically the issue of there's not a strong economic incentive for landlords to weatherize and heat switch for their buildings. Only about a quarter of Vermont renters have their utilities included in their rent. So for all the other ones, we don't know the split of who's paying for which utilities, but a significant portion are paying for their own heat. So that means if the landlord weatherizes the building, that's great. Plenty of landlords do, but unfortunately, there's no cost incentive for them to do so. So we know a lot of renters are paying way too much, and there's nothing they can do to improve, or there's very little they can do, I should say, in the short term to improve their homes. And so programs like the Weatherization Assistance Program are going to be really key to sort of filling that need, but we know that renters above 80% AMI and other types of arrangements are going to struggle under the Clean Heat Standard. So I think we're going to be pressing the legislature to think outside of just the Clean Heat Standard and think about complementary programs to improve our housing stock and potentially consider better oversight of our rental stock. But so thinking globally, I think we're concerned about where more of the same and more incentives aren't going to help in the short term to help people out.
Would you, for the uninitiated AMI?
Sorry, yeah, I know we were gonna get in trouble with that. AMI is percentage of area median income, and we usually think about that in terms of household size and area, but generally speaking, 60% of area median income, so that's the low income obligation under the Clean Heat Standard, is $61,400 for a family of 4. So, depending on how many people in your household or which county you live in, it could be more or less than that, but that's sort of the target. So, I'm checking my notes here. 51% of all renters are at or below 60% AMI. So, yeah, that's a big concern of the Equity Advisory Group.
Curtis, I may torture your question, but because the complexity of a credit is, to me, very simple. Estimates are we have to weatherize an additional 90,000 homes before 2030. install maybe 118,000 more heat pumps by 2030. For the most part, that's going to be free technology given to the homeowner. Estimated cost and delivered to the technical advisory group some weeks ago by a consultant working for the Department of Public Service, pegged it at about $17.3 billion between now and 2050. Now, that number may be high by 50%, so we're talking about $8 billion. The credits are what the fuel dealer will have to pay to deliver your fuel. And if the fuel credit cost to the deliverer is reflected in your bill, you have no choice, you're going to have to pay it. That credit then becomes, for me, the reason I may not stay in Vermont, because that high price is going to make my family say, we just can't afford to live here, right? Because we could be paying not 2 cents, but 4 cents, or 6 cents, or 8, or 10 cents, the weatherization assistance program. At 10 cents, it would bring in almost $25 million. It could be going out to people who need weatherization in the median, the lower median income stratum. No, the credit system is designed to increase your cost of fuel so that you will use less, period.
So a clean heat standard would be a requirement on fossil fuel corporations that import fossil heating fuels into Vermont, but it would provide incentives and flexibility for Vermonters. There is no requirement in the clean heat standard for individual Vermonters to do anything. And in fact, it is designed for flexibility. If you look at the statute, there are over 12 explicitly listed options for what will qualify as a clean, to be eligible for clean heat credits. What is a clean heat credit? It's anything that reduces greenhouse gas emissions. And so, there has been much misinformation out there about this law. I saw somebody put out something saying this requires Vermonters to install heat pumps. It doesn't require you to do anything, and heat pumps are only one of more than a dozen options of how we can reduce fossil fuel pollution from our thermal sector. There's weatherization, there's heat pump water heaters, there's advanced wood heat. There's a whole list that we can read in the law, and the technical advisory group and the Public Utility Commission will likely come up with more. I want to focus on this question though of prices and incentives and how they all work and come together. So again, the requirement is on the importers of fossil fuels to Vermont. They have to purchase a certain number of clean heat credits that adds up to a certain amount of emissions reduction in line with the targets. The way that they are likely to do that is to try to incentivize more of the activity that reduces emissions. So that means that costs for folks who choose cleaner heating options, or weatherization, or heat pump water heaters, those are going to become more accessible and more affordable. How does that get paid for? The responsibility to pay for those credits is on the fossil fuel corporations. And I would just pause to say that many of them are some of the largest, most profitable corporations in this state. You look at Irving Oil, part of the Fortune 100, Global Partners, VGS. I mean, there are some, smaller fuel dealers. Most of them are not importing fossil fuels into Vermont. These are very large corporations. They're then going to have a choice. How do they pay for the incentives for the cleaner heat? Many of them are saying they're going to pass that cost of compliance onto their fossil fuel customers. And this is something that I want to pause on because it's really important. There's been information put out that says the cost of heating fuel is going to go up. We need to be really specific. Words and definitions matter. It is not the cost of heating fuel. It is potentially the cost of fossil heating fuels that will go up. But any and all of that price increase, whatever it is going to directly go to lowering the price of weatherization, increased incentives and lowering the price of other clean heat alternatives. So there's going to be price effects in both directions. Upward price pressure on polluting fuels, downward price pressure on cleaner fuels. We don't, there's evidence of this from across the country. In Oregon, they have a clean fuels program that's very similar to this, but it's for transportation fuels. And what they saw, was I can't remember the exact number, I think it was 5 to 10 cents a gallon increase on diesel. But what did that money do? It then brought down the cost of B100 biodiesel, which on a life cycle emissions basis is anywhere from a fifth to a half as polluting. It also incentivized more EV charging infrastructure. So I just want to make sure that whenever we have a conversation about price effects of the clean heat standard, we're doing so in a holistic, fully honest and comprehensive way, not just looking at one side of the equation. I think it's also worth noting, it is doing forecasts out to 2050 or in future price effects is incredibly difficult to do. I would say it's impossible to do without details being fleshed out and being provided that are only going to be available when the draft rule is written or when more work has happened by the technical and equity advisory groups. Right now, there are numbers that are being thrown all over the place. There's no factual basis for them because the information that's necessary to generate those calculations has not yet been developed. John mentioned this presentation that was given recently to the technical advisory group, and they were estimating twice the amount of emissions reduction being required from the thermal sector that is actually required. So let's pause, let's get the right inputs, let's get the right assumptions, let's actually do our due diligence with the data and not jump ahead to numbers that are not ready yet.
Okay, so there are many people in this room who have responsibility for their town energy plans. So what advice might you give them as they go about trying to position the town relative to Act 18? Where would you put the emphasis for that?
I think one of the most important aspects is ensuring that folks actually have adequate information about services provided. Vermont has a patchwork of different services, different providers. I think centralizing that information, especially if you can do it in town clerk's office, whoever's office, where people just come in, pay their bills, or do anything else, or on the website, providing that information is crucial. From an energy planning aspect as well, it's going to be taken into account if clean heat standard is going in the right direction, if it is reducing. We have an existing regulatory mechanism. If you're looking at overall reductions in greenhouse gases, think about, okay, we've got thermal potentially covered with clean heat. What are you going to do with transportation? What are you going to do with other pieces? And so it might also help inform where your priorities are in terms of, if your priorities are GHG reductions, how does the clean heat standard fit into that? And for that, as Jared noted, we are going to have more information. We've been building the airplane as it's flying, sprinting towards the finish line, all these different analogies, and we're working really hard on it. And we'll have greater information, hopefully in the next few months.
So would you support the idea of having energy navigators, given that this information is so dispersed?
I very much personally support the idea of energy navigators. I think it's one of the better ideas I've heard. Ensuring that people actually know what the programs are. In Vermont, we're good at pancaking programs. We never actually get rid of existing programs. We just put another one adjacent or overlapping to it. And that can be frustrating in a lot of ways. So I think having a navigator who really understands it and can help point people in the right direction is a great idea. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, would definitely agree about the use of energy navigators and energy coaches. We're definitely hearing for moderate income homeowners who are considering putting clean heat measures into their homes that it's really difficult to navigate the system of incentives and know what's available and find a contractor you can trust and all that. So that is a real challenge, and I think that's where local experts can really provide some local solutions. In terms of, I think what Ed said about thinking holistically, I'm going to put on my Hauser hat at this, really thinking about how other sectors will be affected as well by local choices. From a housing perspective, we need more affordable housing. The lack of supply is really putting significant pressure on prices. And when we make it harder to build homes, the cost of the homes that we do build gets more. So, we have, as an agency, been concerned about, local communities sort of reaching too far with local energy requirements and sort of accidentally, making it more expensive to build. That can sometimes displace development out of our downtown centers and into less developed areas, which can increase the transportation burden and increase our transportation costs. So definitely looking at our systems holistically and figuring out sort of what immediately benefits low-income households and lets all of our systems work together, I think is really crucial for local planning. And Act 18 will be just one component where I think it'll take a couple of years to figure out sort of what does the market look like and what are the best choices we can make. But thinking early and holistically at the local level is going to be really important.
I'm going to leave a little time for any questions or comments from the audience. I think we close out here at what, noon?
At noon. Yep.
At noon. So,
just following on that, local groups, local town plans, one of the critiques I have of the Clean Heat Standard is that we come so close to giving towns a really useful tool to know how much of which different kinds of fossil fuels are coming into their region, right? We're gathering that information because we know the fuel companies are gonna have to report how much they're selling into Vermont. It does not, this act does not give me, though, on the town level, an awareness of how much coal is coming in, how much propane, how much heating oil. And if I had that, then I could actually do those campaigns to do outreach and find out about the hotel with an indoor pool that's being heated with coal. But I can't find that out currently because of the way this is framed. That information doesn't have to be specific, it should be anonymized, so I don't know the fuel dealers, I don't know the consumers, but I do know the amount that's coming into my community. I'm from the town of Brattleboro, I'm the sustainability coordinator in the planning department, and we're like so close to having that ability to do this through this piece of legislation, but we're not there yet. And anybody who's working on this issue, we need to have a data stream that's anonymous, that protects the industry. They don't want people to know how much they're selling into whom. But on the town level, we deserve to know how much of which fuels are coming in so that we can put attention to those and reach those people who otherwise have a private business relationship that I have no insight into, so I don't know how to reach them. I don't know how to be the navigator for those folks. So that's my comment. Please do something about that.
Right here? I need a mic. I'm wondering, this may be one of those details that hasn't been worked out yet, but I'm wondering, for those of us who are off the grid, so we put a fair amount of investment into solar and generators and all of that stuff, but we are reliant on propane, typically, and I'm wondering if there's some, for lack of a better way to describe it, some offset, so that even though I'm doing my part by being off the grid, I'm not penalized by my propane fuel going up.
and as you respond to that question, to what extent is is the business model around energy changing? And, you know, if you're off the grid, is there a corresponding, and I'm just gonna ask this flat out, is there a consolidation of propane dealers in the state, or are they expanding? Because it would seem to be that competition is desirable.
I just read recently that the concentration in the propane industry is significant. Now it's 2 major suppliers. And I can only say for those who are looking at a future of expanding and perhaps adding more propane, it'll pay the price that competition has given up to concentration.
If I offer something.
Sure.
So my day job is I direct an organization called the Energy Action Network, which non-partisan. We don't take positions on bills or dockets in front of the PUC. Our focus is on research and analysis. We recently published a piece about how Vermont's thermal sector is changing. And one of the things that's really interesting is that we're actually seeing, even though overall fossil heating fuel use is going down, primarily as a result of, on average, warmer winters, but also because of the effects of greater heat pump adoption, increasing weatherization, those are also having an effect, that within that overall decline, we're actually seeing propane sales increase. It's fossil fuel oil is declining very significantly, and we see more and more people moving to propane, and even amidst that overall decline, propane sales are going up. So that's an interesting feature of what's happening in the heating fuel market. I just want to go back to the last question, though, about the opportunity and the responsibility that towns have around planning. And one of those opportunities and responsibilities that towns get to have is to look beyond just the current moment and do long-term planning. And I would say that there's 2 reasons why planning for a future either beyond or minimizing fossil fuel use is really beneficial. One is from a really practical perspective. I'm sorry I don't have my slides, but there are copies of EAN's annual progress report for Vermont on the resource table back in the main hall. I invite people to look at it. We have a chart in there that shows the comparative costs of different heating fuels over time. And the common theme of fuel oil and propane is higher on average cost than other heating options and severe price volatility, which can really strain town, commercial, individual budgets. The other feature that's really important to know about fossil fuel use in Vermont is that fossil fuels are 100% imported. And as a global commodity product, the vast majority of the dollars that we spend on them drain out of our state economy. It's mostly paying to the out-of-state fossil fuel corporations who are bringing this product in. So it's about 75 cents of every dollar that we spend on fossil fuel leaves the state economy. What about the things that the Affordable Heat Act points to and is going to incentivize and increase? Using efficient electricity through heat pumps and heat pump water heaters, advanced wood heat, local wood. Those are things where that equation gets flipped, and about 75 cents of every dollar will stay and recirculate in our economy. So it's an opportunity to think about where are our energy dollars going, and are they working for us or against us? And when we switch to heating efficiently with electricity, with local sustainable wood, then that dollar outflow equation gets reversed, and instead we're investing in the Vermont economy and jobs for our neighbors, which is a really important component of this.
Just wanted to provide a very direct answer in terms of off-grid. There's nothing in the Act, there's nothing that I think could potentially authorize the PUC to provide an offset for something that's off-grid. So just wanted to directly respond on that one. With respect to the question about change in the business and also consolidation of providers, I just want to make a quick point. We've been regulating electricity, the electric sector, for 100 years comprehensively because it's a monopoly utility structure. So we fully regulate it. I've been doing this for 20-something years. I could nerd out for days on the electric sector. I've been doing it for a very, very long time. We're now moving into more direct regulation of heating fuel providers. I know very little. I can nerd out for about 5 minutes tops, and most of the people in this room would far out surpass me on a good day. So it's something that we all, I think, have to keep in mind of. It's a competitive market that's been out there with very little environmental regulation overlaid other than ensuring tank safety, that you're not having leaking tanks or other issues. But in terms of GHG reductions, it's fairly new. Clean heat standard is fairly new. There's been somewhat other regulatory mechanisms out there, but it's a learning structure and there's going to be growing pains associated with it. I'm not saying it's insurmountable, I'm just noting that it is a complete change in how we do this.
The gentleman to the left of Brattleboro.
My understanding is the energy plan or electrification of for the energy plan or electrification of Vermont, I've heard numbers of close to $10 billion to get the grid up to snuff to handle electrification. Is that number baked into the CHS number at all, or is that going to be a total separate? So we're talking, we can throw out numbers. I've heard 2 billion, 17 billion, 7 billion for the clean heat standard. So if we average that out at 8 billion, are we talking 8 and 10, or are we talking, is that number baked in there somehow into that budget? Thank you.
So the short answer, it's Department of Public Service, separate agency that's done this potential study that John was talking about, Jared mentioned as well. We have not been involved with it. I don't know where those numbers are. My memory is they were mostly focused on the incentives needed to get people to fuel switch. I don't think it was so much on the benefit, but I'm not sure. I haven't actually read the draft study yet. In terms of cost to upgrade Vermont's grid, the distribution system, it's going to be heat pumps and actually even more so electric vehicles. Electric vehicles have even more draw than heat pumps. And yes, there's definitely going to be a cost to switching over to electrifying. And at least at the moment, and the projection is, and we want to test this projection, but moving off volatile gasoline, volatile heating fuels, and having a more stable price for electricity, even if that price will go up for electricity. And it's a question of, is it still going to be less expensive to operate an electric vehicle and a heat pump compared to a gas internal combustion engine and a fossil fuel boiler? Bare minimum, it's going to be a more stable price, more predictable price. And the expectation, and again, I'd love to test this more, looking at macroeconomic trends over 20 years. The expectation is it will end up being less expensive overall, but it does need to be tested. Sorry that wasn't a definitive answer, but we're looking at fuel projections over 20 years, and it's just not clear.
But there's still separate costs.
They are.
Your CHS costs and then your grid enhancement costs.
Yes, if you truly are doing, it's going to be very difficult to untangle the grid upgrade costs, because you also have upgrading the grid for resilience purposes as well, so it's less prone to heavy storms. You have upgrading for the electric vehicles, which is a separate sort of cost compared to heating pump costs. So very difficult to just clearly say, yes, that $10 billion or whatever the right number is for upgrading the grid should be factored in 1-for-1 on the clean heat benefits.
If I can just add to that.
Okay, and then we'll go to the gentleman in back on the right.
Yeah, I think it's really important to pause on this question of why are there likely savings from electrification? And it's because it's not immediately obvious. And a big part of it comes down to the technology. And so for instance, Ed was talking about gas vehicles and fossil fuel boilers and furnaces as compared to electric vehicles and heat pumps. Fossil fuel vehicles and heating systems use internal combustion. You're combusting a fuel to generate either heat in transit, and then that can move a vehicle, for instance. When gasoline is combusted, only about, the figures vary, it's about 15 to 20% of that energy actually is delivered to the wheels and moves the vehicle. The vast majority of that energy is lost to heat and other engine losses and doesn't actually move the vehicle. When it comes to boilers and furnaces, the laws of thermodynamics max out their potential efficiency at 100%. Oftentimes they're in the high 80s or low 90s of efficiency. You compare those to electric vehicles and heat pumps, and you have the opportunity to achieve the same thing, the same movement, or the same amount of heat for about a quarter or a fifth of the energy input. How is that possible? Because electric vehicles don't use internal combustion, and instead you've got 80 to 90% of the energy input actually moving the vehicle. And then you recapture some of that energy through regenerative braking and other technologies. On the heating side, a heat pump is not generating heat, it's transferring heat, which allows heat pumps to achieve efficiencies that are over 200%. So the amount of energy input in terms of what you get out of it can be a fraction of what it is on the combustion side, and that's where a lot of these cost savings can come from. I do hesitate to say anything about numbers in the potential study because the consultants who did them said, we are sharing this because we want to get feedback on the inputs and the assumptions. This is not for attribution, this is not for distribution. That has not stopped anybody from cherry picking numbers and presenting them out of context. Those numbers are going to change because a lot of the inputs and assumptions were not proper. But the number that they provided that's being pointed to is $17 billion in potential investment cost by 2050. What's not getting talked about is that this exact same study estimated $20 billion in benefits from that investment, including some of those cost savings, for a net of a $3 billion net benefit. I'm sure that all three of those numbers are going to change, but again, I think it's really important that we have a holistic, comprehensive, total energy conversation about not what's just happening on the fossil side, but what's happening on the other side, and how do those compare and how do they net out, because that's where we can get not just significant climate pollution reduction, but significant reductions in energy costs for Vermonters.
Great, thank you. And I want to double back to Hydro-Quebec at some point, but we've got this gentleman in the back.
Thank you all. Just a question, maybe this is for another time, but with the Inflation Reduction Act and lots of money starting to flow down from the federal government related to energy efficiency, related to weatherization, related to reduction in energy costs, how does that play within this act, and what can municipal governments do to position themselves to be able to take advantage of those additional dollars that might be coming available to help with affordable housing or efficiency within affordable housing or weatherization programs which are already established or yet to be established? Is that a factor? Is that something that the council or the committees are considering as you're going through this process? I'll come to you.
Yeah, so part of my day job is to really work through this Inflation Reduction Act and to try to figure out what that's going to mean for affordable housing. And there's a lot of different sources, and in affordable housing, we're lucky to think of sort of a capital stack. you know, there's a bunch of different sources from different housing funding sources that we're already sort of stacking into affordable housing projects. So figuring out, you know, in an affordable housing context, what's available and sort of what is it incentivizing, like an all-electric or net zero building, and sort of puzzle piecing it together for an affordable housing project is how we're going to do that. I'm hopeful that the clean heat standard is sort of another injection into a project's capital stack, where, you know, like I said, an obligated party will pay for some of the costs of electrifying that affordable housing building. I think everybody else is going to be doing some sort of flavor of that for their projects, sort of figuring out what's available and what's feasible, and sort of puzzle piecing the clean heat standard into their calculations. Certainly on the you know, Inflation Reduction Act, there are some exciting new tax credit opportunities for communities that are installing things that are clean heat measures, and some things that aren't, like solar panels that aren't a clean heat measure but can offset costs of electrifying a building. And the Inflation Reduction Act has some great benefits for, even if you don't have tax liability, you can use direct pay to offset some of the costs and get some of those costs back as a municipality or nonprofit. But that whole idea of energy navigation and figuring out these things is going to be really challenging, and it's something we're concerned about because, yeah, it's our job as affordable housing funders to figure out, and we definitely have not totally done that. And I know the state is taking a close look at new resources like the DOE home energy rebates that are going to start coming online early next year through the WAP program and through Efficiency Vermont and other utilities. But just figuring out how to do that as a puzzle piece is going to be really challenging, and adding the clean heat standard on definitely adds another layer. And I think it's going to take at least a year or two to figure out the most effective way to fund these projects and sort of our new normal. So I'm very excited about it because there's more money than we've ever seen before, but figuring out how to do that is not clear yet, and I don't believe the draft potential study considered the Inflation Reduction Act resources in it. Is that correct? I'll hand over the mic.
I can't say for certain. My recollection is that the potential study assumed that 100 or even more, 125% of the project costs for a clean heat measure would be borne by the obligated parties, would be borne by the fossil fuel companies, when we know that that's just not true. There are the Inflation Reduction Act incentives, which apply to, you know, a lot of electrification at the home and building scale. There are also existing incentives and programs that are not going away. They will likely get more funding as a result of clean heat credits, including weatherization programs and existing incentive programs that our electric utilities and our efficiency utilities provide. But I think that the stack example is a really good one, Mia, because we have to remember it isn't going to exist on its own. The clean heat standard will be part of a broader fabric that already exists to provide incentives for Vermonters and Vermont businesses to help move away from fossil fuels. And the Inflation Reduction Act, I mean, it's interesting because it feels like, oh, we've been hearing about this for years because it passed years ago, but in terms of writing the rules for that money to actually flow, it really hasn't started in earnest yet. And so there is this lag time, and I think we're going to start to see more of the effect of that.
Could I ask a question about equity? You mentioned about landlords and renters, and I'm just wondering what kind of information there is about, you know, is there a registry of landlords? Do we know who are investing in their properties and the level to which they're investing in them, so that they're renters who are paying for their energy bills themselves are not disadvantaged?
So the short answer is no, we don't have that information. The data that we do have is really from general sources like the US Census Bureau, so not at the granular level. There's been a whole history of trying to figure out how to deal with rental housing and code enforcement. There's been a few efforts in recent years to get a rental registry, which I think most people regard as sort of the first step that you would need to seriously undertake rental code enforcement, and that has failed to pass in the legislature. Oh, sorry, it was vetoed. I'm sorry. That's good characterization. It failed to be enacted into law, I should say. Thank you for that clarification. So that has been a real challenge to sort of get a framework for any sort of serious code enforcement. At the local level, we have, health and safety codes, but that's really done through a patchwork of mostly volunteer town health officers that don't have a ton of resources to sort of do that, and certainly not on a sort of thermal weatherization basis. You have some cities that do have a code enforcement framework, and the city of Burlington has sort of grafted a weatherization ordinance on top of that, but that's sort of built off an existing code enforcement mechanism, and they have good data from Vermont Gas about who's using the highest amount of fuels in buildings, and they've been able to use sort of a carrots and sticks approach to get landlords to start weatherizing sort of the most energy intensive buildings. But that, really didn't happen overnight. I've heard that, Burlington has sort of struggled with the lack of contractors to get that work done. So I think in our equity advisory report, we will be pointing out that this is a really big equity problem, and that the state is going to have to really look at sort of global solutions to deal with our rental housing stock, and potentially provide more incentives as well. The WAP program is doing great work in rental homes, but they certainly, we are doing some back of the envelope estimating that only about 80% of the eligible population, renters and homeowners, have benefited from those services in the last few decades. So it's definitely going to require global solutions beyond sort of what the clean heat standard can provide to really achieve equity in the way that I think Vermont likes to talk about. So it's a good question. Yeah.
Time for one more question.
Hi, I'm Bill Chinsey. I'm one of the old school 20th century burner men in the room. So I just want to comment about that, about the rental housing registry. It's really important because I've seen, as a fuel truck delivery driver, landlords take a house and divide it into 5 apartments, and because of fuel assistance, they got free boilers, free boilers and 5 oil tanks put in that house. And what a waste. It is so sad to see the public money on fuel assistance subsidizing that business model. And this was in Brattleboro, and it was prevalent everywhere. You find these houses with 5 boilers in them, all paid for with tax dollars. Thank you for letting me comment on that subject.
You're welcome. The Public Utilities Commission needs to hear from you. On your desk, there's a card here with a QR code. And I'm going to direct you to the one that says scan for more clean heat standard information. That will take you to the PUC's webpage on clean energy, on clean heat, excuse me. And you look for the column on the right-hand side for rulemaking. Click on that, and they would love to hear your thoughts on the proposed rules. I mean, you're still in the proposal mode, right?
Yeah, the plan is to have draft rule available around October 1st, and then there'll be a 30-day comment, but anytime people want to chime in, we have regular meetings, technical advisory group, equity advisory group. We ask for comments on different issues. There's a lot of information. It's very easy to get overwhelmed. If there's a particular issue that you're interested in, our website we've tried to set it up so that you can somewhat follow a particular issue. It's just, there's a lot, so I apologize in advance if you go to the website and have a little bit of shock. We're trying.
Well, it is a government website. It's true. Great. Well, I'd like to thank Ed and Mia, John, and Jared. I'd like to thank all of you who we're going to turn into policy walks around clean energy. All right, thank you very much.
So I'll take a big breath.
Yes. And from here it's lunch, so if folks want to head towards the cafeteria, I think that'll be sort of the closest. You come out of Green and kind of go away from Judd.
And there's tables in there.
Yeah, and tables to sit and connect.
Just